The morning sun peeked through the blinds as James Wilson packed his small carry-on suitcase. At 78 years old, his hands moved slower than they once did, but they worked with the careful precision of someone who had spent a lifetime being methodical. He folded his cardigan sweater neatly and placed it on top of his other clothes. "Don't forget your medicine, James," he reminded himself, moving to the bathroom to collect his pill organizer. Living alone for the past 5 years since Evelyn passed had taught him to talk to himself now and then. It helped keep his thoughts straight, especially on busy days like today. James was excited to fly from Chicago to Seattle to see his grandchildren. His daughter Lisa had just had another baby, his 6th grandchild, and he couldn't wait to hold the little one. He'd been planning this trip for months, saving from his pension and marking each passing day on his kitchen calendar with a red X. The taxi arrived right on time at 8:30 a.m. James grabbed his carry-on, his special pillow for his back, and the small wrapped gifts he'd picked out for each grandchild. The driver was friendly enough, asking about his travel plans. "Going to see my family in Seattle," James said with a proud smile. "My newest grandchild just turned 3 months old." "That's wonderful, sir," the driver replied. "First time flying to Seattle?" "Oh no," James chuckled. "But it's been about 2 years since my last visit. Too long, if you ask me." The ride to O'Hare International Airport took longer than expected due to morning traffic, but James had allowed plenty of time. He'd been a professor of history for over 40 years at the university, and punctuality had become second nature to him. Arriving at the airport, James paid the driver, including a generous tip, and made his way inside the busy terminal. The noise and bustle of the airport always overwhelmed him slightly. Young people rushed past with their phones in hand. Families corralled excited children, and business travelers marched purposefully toward their gates. James approached the check-in kiosk, squinting at the screen through his bifocals. A kind airline employee noticed his hesitation and came over to help. "Let me assist you with that, sir," she offered. "Thank you," James said with relief. "These machines and I don't always get along." With his boarding pass printed, James headed toward the security checkpoint. The line wasn't too long for a Tuesday morning, but it still stretched back quite a ways. He settled in for the wait, leaning slightly on his cane. The hip replacement he'd had 2 years ago had helped tremendously, but standing for long periods still bothered him. As he inched forward in the line, James mentally went through his checklist. Boarding pass and ID ready, shoes easy to slip off. Laptop, well, he didn't travel with one of those, but he did have a new tablet his son had given him for his birthday. And of course, there was the special device in his bag, the prototype his former colleagues had asked him to bring to Seattle for the conference. When he finally reached the front of the line, James carefully placed his items in the plastic bins: shoes, belt, watch, and carry-on bag. He walked through the metal detector without issue and waited for his belongings on the other side. That's when things began to change. He noticed the TSA agent looking at the screen. With a furrowed brow as his bag passed through the X-ray machine, the agent called over a colleague who studied the screen with equal intensity before looking up at James with an unreadable expression. "Sir, could you step aside, please?" the second agent asked, not unkindly but firmly. James nodded, confused but not particularly worried. "Is something wrong with my bag?" "We just need to take a closer look," the agent replied, retrieving the bag from the conveyor belt. Standard procedure. James waited patiently as the agents examined his carry-on. More agents seemed to appear, and hushed conversations took place just out of earshot. James began to feel a slight uneasiness creeping up his spine. He had nothing to hide, but the growing number of security personnel around him was concerning. A tall agent in a different uniform approached. "Mr. Wilson? I'm Officer Chen with Airport Security. We need to ask you a few questions about the contents of your luggage. Would you mind coming with me?" "I suppose that would be all right," James replied. Reaching for his bag, "I'm sorry, sir, but we'll need to hold on to this for now," Officer Chen said, gesturing to another agent who was already carrying James's bag away. James felt his heart rate increase slightly. "My medicine is in there," he said, "and I have a flight to catch in an hour and a half." "This shouldn't take long," Officer Chen assured him, though something in his tone suggested otherwise. "Please follow me." As they walked through the terminal, James noticed people watching. Some quickly averted their eyes when he looked their way, while others stared openly with expressions ranging from curiosity to something that looked uncomfortably like suspicion. James straightened his back and lifted his chin slightly, a habit formed during the civil rights era when he'd learned that dignity was sometimes the only defense available. They arrived at a small room away from the main concourse. It contained a table, 3 chairs, and nothing else. No windows, just blank walls and a door that Officer Chen closed firmly behind them. "Please have a seat, Mr. Wilson," he said, gesturing to one of the chairs. Another person entered, a woman in a dark suit who introduced herself as Agent Reynolds. Her handshake was firm, her expression professionally neutral. "Mr. Wilson, can you explain what this device is in your luggage?" she asked without preamble, placing a photo of the prototype medical device on the table. "Oh, that," James said, relief washing over him. "That's a medical monitoring prototype. I'm helping test it. I'm supposed to deliver it to the research team in Seattle for a presentation at the Medical Technology Conference." The agents exchanged glances. "And why would they trust you with this prototype?" Officer Chen asked. James blinked, taken aback by the question. "Because I helped design it. After I retired from teaching, I consulted with the biomedical engineering department. We've been working on non-invasive blood glucose monitoring systems." Agent Reynolds jotted something in a small notebook. "You're a medical doctor then?" "No, I was a history professor, but my minor was in electrical engineering. After retirement, I wanted to use my knowledge to help people. The university has an emeritus program that lets retired professors contribute to other departments." More notes were taken, more glances exchanged. "Mr. Wilson, are you traveling alone today?" Agent Reynolds asked. "Yes, I'm going to visit my daughter and grandchildren." "And the purpose of this visit is solely personal?" James hesitated, confused by the direction of questioning. "Well, mostly. I'll be dropping by the medical conference to deliver the prototype and help with the presentation. It's just for one afternoon of my 2-week stay." Officer Chen leaned forward. "And you regularly travel with experimental electronic devices?" "This is the first time," James replied, a sense of unease growing within him. "Is there a problem with that?" "I have documentation." "We'll get to that," Officer Chen interrupted. "First, I'd like to know about your recent travels." James thought for a moment. "I haven't traveled much lately. Last year I went to my grandson's graduation in Boston. Before that," he paused, trying to remember. His memory wasn't what it used to be. "I think it was a trip to Philadelphia for a historical society meeting." "Any international travel?" Agent Reynolds pressed. "Not for several years. My passport expired and I haven't renewed it." The questioning continued, becoming increasingly pointed. They asked about his contacts abroad, his political affiliations, his religious views. Each question seemed to build upon a narrative James couldn't quite grasp, but one that clearly cast him in a suspicious light. An hour had passed, and James was growing tired and increasingly concerned. His flight would be boarding soon, and he still hadn't been told exactly why he was being detained. "I don't mean to be rude," he finally said, "but I really don't understand what's happening here. Have I done something wrong? Am I in some kind of trouble?" Agent Reynolds' expression remained impassive. "Mr. Wilson, we're simply following security protocols when potentially concerning items are identified in luggage. The device you're carrying triggered several alerts in our system." "It's just a medical prototype," James insisted. "If you call Dr. Robert Thompson at Northwestern University, he can verify everything I've told you." "We'll look into that," Officer Chen said, standing up. "In the meantime, we need to conduct a more thorough investigation. This could take several more hours. But my flight, I'm afraid you'll need to make other arrangements," Agent Reynolds said. "We can't allow you to board until we've completed our security assessment." As they left the room, James heard the distinct sound of a lock engaging. He was alone now, in a small windowless room with no way to contact his family and no idea when he would be released. For the first time since the questioning began, real fear settled in his stomach. Something was very wrong, and he couldn't shake the feeling that it had less to do with what was in his bag and more to do with who he was, an elderly black man traveling alone. Through the door, he heard fragments of conversation. A profile matches several. Indicators, received calls from international. Numbers, potential security threat. James sat back in the uncomfortable chair, his thoughts turning to his daughter Lisa, who would be waiting for him at the Seattle airport. unaware that he was sitting in a detention room, somehow transformed from a respected retired professor into a suspected security threat. Outside the room, the airport continued its normal rhythm, flights departing and arriving, passengers rushing to gates or greeting loved ones. But in this small, sealed space, time seemed to stand still as James Wilson waited, wondering how a simple trip to see his family had gone so terribly wrong. The room felt smaller with each passing minute. James shifted uncomfortably in the hard plastic chair, his lower back beginning to ache. He checked his watch again, 2:15 p.m. His flight had departed over an hour ago. The door opened suddenly, and Officer Chen returned with a paper cup of water, which he placed on the table without comment. James reached for it gratefully. His mouth had become dry from the endless questioning. "Thank you," he said, taking a sip. "Could I please make a phone call? My daughter will be worried sick." "Not at this time," Officer Chen replied flatly. "We're still in the middle of our investigation." "Investigation of what, exactly?" James asked, his patience wearing thin despite his best efforts to remain calm. "I'm a 78-year-old retired professor going to visit my family. What could I possibly have done?" Officer Chen's expression remained neutral. "Sir, when individuals carry suspicious electronic devices and receive multiple international calls while in a security checkpoint, it triggers certain protocols." "International calls?" James was genuinely confused. "I haven't received any international calls." As if on cue, his phone, which had been confiscated along with his other belongings, began to ring from somewhere outside the room. Officer Chen glanced toward the door. "That's the third call from an international number in the past hour," he noted. James frowned, trying to think who could be calling him from overseas. Then it dawned on him. That must be Dr. Hassan from the research team. He's in Toronto for the week before heading to the Seattle conference. He's probably wondering why I haven't checked in about the prototype. Officer Chen made a note but offered no response. He left the room again, the lock clicking behind him. James sighed deeply. The whole situation felt increasingly absurd, yet he couldn't deny the undercurrent of fear growing within him. Stories of people detained for hours, sometimes days, flashed through his mind. Stories he'd read about but never imagined would apply to him. The isolation was beginning to affect him. With nothing to focus on but blank walls, his thoughts became less ordered. When had he last taken his blood pressure medication? It should have been around noon, but with his pill organizer in his confiscated bag, he'd missed it. His doctor had been clear about the importance of staying on schedule. Sometime later, James had lost track of exactly how long. The door opened again. This time, a different officer entered, introducing himself as Agent Taylor from Homeland Security. He was younger than the others, perhaps in his 30s, with a more approachable demeanor. "Mr. Wilson, I'd like to go over a few things with you again," he said, taking a seat across the table. "Sometimes details get missed in the initial interview." James nodded wearily. "I'll tell you whatever you need to know, but I still don't understand why I'm being treated this way." "Let's start with the device," Agent Taylor said, ignoring James's comment. "You say it's a medical prototype. Can you explain exactly how it works?" James took a deep breath. "It's a non-invasive glucose monitoring system. For people with diabetes, it uses near-infrared spectroscopy to measure blood sugar levels through the skin without needing to draw blood." He paused, noticing the agent's blank expression. "In simpler terms, it shines a special light through your skin and analyzes what comes back to figure out your blood sugar levels." "And why does it need these components?" Agent Taylor pushed a photo across the table showing the inside of the device, its circuit board exposed. "That's the processing unit and power supply," James explained. "The main board there handles the spectroscopic analysis. The components around it control the light emission and detection. It looks remarkably similar to timing devices used in explosive mechanisms," Agent Taylor said bluntly. James stared at him in disbelief. "Explosive? No, that's absurd. It's a medical device. Any electronics expert could tell you the difference." "We're consulting with our experts," Agent Taylor replied. "In the meantime, let's discuss these international calls you've been receiving. As I told Officer Chen, those must be from Dr. Hassan at the University of Toronto. He's part of the research team. And why would he be calling you so urgently?" James sighed. "Because I was supposed to check in once I landed in Seattle." We're presenting the prototype tomorrow and he's probably concerned about coordination. Agent Taylor made notes. You mentioned earlier that you haven't traveled internationally in years, yet records show you visited Jordan 3 years ago. Can you explain that discrepancy? James frowned, his brow furrowing in concentration. Then recognition dawned. Yes, I remember now. I'm sorry. My memory isn't what it used to be. That was for an academic conference on ancient history. I presented a paper on trade routes in the Byzantine Empire. I forgot about that trip because it was right before my hip surgery. That's a significant detail to forget. Mr. Wilson, when you get to my age, you'll understand, James replied with a hint of irritation. I had a lot on my mind back then with the surgery coming up. The questioning continued, circling back to the same topics repeatedly. The device, his travel history, his connections abroad. Sometimes the questions were the same, just worded differently, as if they were trying to catch him in a contradiction. The technique was familiar to James. He'd read about it in books about interrogation. After what felt like hours, Agent Taylor left, and James was alone again. His watch now read 4:30 p.m. He'd been detained for nearly 6 hours. The missed medication was beginning to affect him. He could feel a slight headache forming behind his eyes and his thoughts were becoming muddled. When the door opened again, James expected another round of questioning. Instead, a female officer he hadn't seen before entered with his pill organizer. I understand you need to take medication, she said, less stern than the others. Yes, thank you, James replied with genuine gratitude. My blood pressure medication. I should have taken it hours ago. She poured him a fresh cup of water and watched as he took the pill. How are you feeling, Mr. Wilson? The simple human concern in her voice almost undid him. Tired, he admitted. Confused. Worried about my daughter, who's probably frantic by now. The officer hesitated. I'll see what I can do about getting you a phone call. Before she could leave, another officer appeared at the door and beckoned her outside. James could hear their muffled voices but couldn't make out the words. When she returned, her professional mask was back in place. I'm sorry, but you'll need to wait a bit longer, was all she said before leaving. James closed his eyes, trying to center himself. He thought of his late wife, Evelyn, who had always been his strength during difficult times. What would you do now, Evie? He whispered to himself. His thoughts were interrupted when the door opened again. This time a different man entered, tall in a suit rather than a uniform, with an air of authority. Mr. Wilson, I'm Director Richards with TSA Operations, he said, extending his hand. I understand you've been here for quite some time. James nodded, shaking the offered hand. Since this morning. No one will tell me exactly why I'm being held or when I can leave. Director Richards sat down. There were several security flags raised by your screening. In the current climate, we have to take every potential threat seriously. Threat? James couldn't keep the indignation from his voice. What threat could I possibly pose? The device in your bag has components similar to those used in improvised explosive devices. Your travel history includes visits to regions of security concern, and you've received multiple international calls while in a secure area of the airport. James shook his head slowly. The device is a medical prototype. I went to Jordan for an academic conference 3 years ago, and the calls are from a colleague in Toronto. None of that makes me a threat. Perhaps not, Director Richards conceded. But until we can verify all these claims independently, we have to follow protocol. And how long will that take? It's already underway. We've contacted the university to verify your employment history and the existence of this medical device project. James felt a surge of hope. Then you'll see I'm telling the truth. We'll see what the facts show, Director Richards replied noncommittally. In the meantime, is there anything you need? I need to call my daughter, James said firmly. She was expecting me hours ago. Director Richards considered this. I'll have someone bring you a phone. You can make a brief call, but please understand it will be monitored. After the director left, James was again alone with his thoughts. The walls of the small room seemed to be closing in on him. He tried to focus on something positive, the faces of his grandchildren, the new baby he hadn't yet met. But his mind kept returning to his current situation. How had this happened? How had a routine trip turned into this nightmare? Was it just bad luck, or was there something more at play? He couldn't help wondering if a younger, white traveler with the same device would have triggered the same response James had experienced. Discrimination throughout his life, from the overt Racism of his childhood in the segregated South to the more subtle biases he'd encountered in academia. He'd always faced it with dignity and perseverance. But at 78, tired and isolated in this small room, the weight of it felt heavier than ever. Finally, an officer returned with a phone. "You have 3 minutes," he said. James's hands trembled slightly as he dialed Lisa's number. She answered on the first ring. "Dad? Where are you? I've been worried sick." The sound of his daughter's voice brought a lump to his throat. "I'm still in Chicago, honey. There's been a misunderstanding at security. They're holding me for questioning." "What? Why, what happened?" James was acutely aware of the officer standing nearby, listening to every word. "It's about the medical device, the prototype. They think it looks suspicious. They're checking with the university now." "That's ridiculous. Do you need me to call someone? A lawyer?" James hesitated. The situation hadn't escalated to that point yet, but how much longer would this go on? "Not yet, but if I'm not released soon." "Time's up," the officer cut in. "Lisa, I have to go." "Don't worry. This will all get sorted out. I love you." "Dad, wait." The line went dead. James handed the phone back, his heart heavy. The brief contact with the outside world had only highlighted his isolation. Back in the small room, time stretched on. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, unchanging despite the passing hours. James dozed off briefly, his chin dropping to his chest only to jerk awake at the sound of voices outside. It was nearly 7 p.m. when the door opened again. Agent Taylor returned, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Wilson, we've received some information from Northwestern University," he said, taking a seat. "They confirmed that you were indeed a history professor there for over 40 years. James nodded wearily. "As I've been saying all along." "They also mentioned something interesting," Agent Taylor continued. "Something you didn't tell us," James frowned. "What's that?" "That in 1968 you were arrested during a civil rights demonstration. And in the 1970s you were on a government watch list for anti-war activities." The memories came flooding back. The march in Memphis after Dr. King's assassination, the campus protests against the Vietnam War. Events from another lifetime. "That was over 50 years ago," James said quietly. "I was fighting for equality and peace. I've never advocated for violence." Agent Taylor studied him for a long moment. "History has a way of following us, Mr. Wilson." As the agent left again, James was struck by the irony. He had spent his career teaching history, showing his students how the past shaped the present. Now his own past had somehow reached across the decades to cast him as suspicious, potentially dangerous. Outside the room, unknown to James, a new development was unfolding that would soon change everything. But for now he remained alone, an elderly man far from home, wondering if he had become a prisoner of history itself. Lisa Wilson paced the arrival area at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. Her phone pressed tightly to her ear as she tried her father's number for the 20th time. Again, it went straight to voicemail. "Dad, it's Lisa again. Please call me as soon as you get this. I'm still at the airport and I'm really worried." She ended the call and checked the flight information board. Flight 372 from Chicago had landed 3 hours ago. Every other passenger had exited, collected their luggage, and departed. Only her father was missing. Lisa approached the airline desk where a patient attendant named Miguel had been helping her for the past hour. "Any word from Chicago?" she asked, her voice tight with worry. Miguel shook his head. "I'm sorry, Ms. Wilson. They've confirmed that your father never boarded the flight, but they don't have any additional information." Lisa rubbed her temples, trying to think clearly. This isn't like him. He's extremely punctual, almost to a fault. She hesitated, then voiced the fear that had been growing. Could something have happened to him? A medical emergency, maybe? We've checked with airport medical services in Chicago. There are no reports of anyone matching your father's description. A cold knot formed in Lisa's stomach. Then her phone rang, an unknown Chicago number. She answered immediately. "Hello, this is Lisa Wilson." "Lisa, it's Dad." Relief flooded through her. "Dad, what happened? Where are you?" "I'm still at O'Hare. There's been a situation with security. They're questioning me about the prototype device." "What? That's ridiculous." Her relief quickly turned to anger. "How long have they been holding you?" "Since this morning." "Listen, I don't have much time to talk. They're checking with the university, but it's taking a while. Do you need a lawyer? I can call Thomas. He practices in Chicago." "Not yet. But if this goes on much longer." His voice sounded tired, strained. "Time's up," she heard someone say in the background. "Lisa, I have to go." "Don't worry. This will all get sorted out. I love you." "Dad, wait." But the line had already gone dead. Lisa stared at her phone in disbelief. Her father, a respected retired professor, a gentleman who had never harmed anyone, was being detained as some kind of security threat. It made no sense. She thanked Miguel for his help, then moved to a quiet corner of the terminal and made a call to her brother Michael in Boston. "Mike, it's Lisa. Dad's been detained by airport security in Chicago. They're questioning him about that medical device he was bringing for the conference." "Detained? Since when?" "Since this morning. He just called me. They've had him for hours, Mike." Her brother's voice turned serious. "This is about that prototype? The glucose monitor?" "Yes, apparently they think it looks suspicious." "That's absurd. It's a medical device, not a bomb." "I know that and you know that, but they're treating him like he's some kind of threat." Lisa's voice broke slightly. "He sounded so tired, Mike." "Did they say how long they'll hold him?" "No, just that they're investigating. They're checking with Northwestern, but who knows how long that will take." Michael was quiet for a moment. "Have you called Dr. Thompson? He's the lead on the project, right? Maybe he can clear this up." "I haven't. Do you have his number?" "No, but I can find it. I'll call him right away and explain what's happening." Michael paused. "Lisa, is anyone with the kids? Do you need to get home?" Lisa glanced at her watch. It was nearly 8 p.m. in Seattle. "My neighbor's with them. I should probably head back soon, but it feels wrong to just leave when Dad's stuck there." "There's nothing you can do from the airport. Go home, take care of the kids, and I'll work on this from my end. I'll call Dr. Thompson and then get in touch with some contacts I have. Maybe they can help move things along." After saying goodbye to her brother, Lisa reluctantly left the airport. As she drove home, her mind raced with worry and indignation. Her father had lived an exemplary life, teaching thousands of students over his long career, contributing to his community, raising his family with love and integrity. How could anyone look at James Wilson and see a threat? Back in Chicago, James sat alone in the detention room, fighting to stay alert despite his exhaustion. His back ached from the uncomfortable chair and hunger gnawed at his stomach. Someone had brought him a sandwich and a bag of chips hours ago, but he'd barely touched it, his appetite diminished by stress. He thought of his suitcase, somewhere in the bowels of airport security, containing the small gifts he'd so carefully selected for each grandchild. Would he ever get to give them those presents? Would he see his new grandchild anytime soon? The door opened, startling him from his thoughts. A young TSA agent entered, someone he hadn't seen before. He looked barely out of his 20s with a serious expression that seemed at odds with his youthful face. "Mr. Wilson, I'm Agent David Lee." He closed the door behind him but remained standing. "I've been assigned to review your case." James straightened in his chair, wincing as his stiff muscles protested. "Does that mean there's some progress?" "We're continuing our investigation," Agent Lee replied neutrally. "I'd like to go through some of the information again if you don't mind." James sighed. "I've been over everything multiple times. What more can I tell you? Sometimes fresh eyes spot things others miss." Agent Lee pulled out a tablet and began scrolling through what James assumed was his file. "You mentioned earlier that you're bringing this device to a medical technology conference in Seattle?" "Yes, the International Conference on Biomedical Engineering Innovations. It starts tomorrow, and your role is?" "I'm part of the team presenting the prototype. I helped design some of the electrical components." Agent Lee looked up from his tablet. "You're a medical engineer?" "No, I was a history professor, but I have a background in electrical engineering from my undergraduate days. After I retired, I wanted to use those skills to contribute to something meaningful." The young agent nodded, making a note. "The team that developed this device, can you tell me who they are?" "Dr. Robert Thompson leads the project. He's the head of biomedical engineering at Northwestern. Then there's Dr. Hassan from Toronto, who specializes in spectroscopic analysis. Dr. Chen handles the software side and IT. Here are several graduate students involved as well." "And you said Dr. Hassan is currently in Toronto?" "Yes, he's flying directly to Seattle for the conference. He's probably wondering why I haven't checked in." Agent Lee made another note, then asked, "Mr. Wilson, what can you tell me about your work during the civil rights movement?" The question caught James off guard. "That was a lifetime ago. What does it have to do with today?" "Just building a complete picture," Agent Lee said. Your file mentions arrests at demonstrations in the 1960s. James leaned back, memories washing over him.
I believed in the cause, still do.
I participated in peaceful protests. I taught my students about the importance of standing up for justice and equality. He paused, studying the young agent. Is that relevant to why I'm being detained now? Agent Lee didn't answer directly. And after retirement, you chose to work on medical technology? Yes, my wife Evelyn had diabetes. I watched her struggle with daily blood tests, the pain of constant finger pricks. When Dr. Thompson mentioned his team was working on a non-invasive monitoring system, I volunteered my time. Too late to help Evelyn, but maybe it could help others. Something in Agent Lee's expression shifted slightly. And this device you're carrying, it could make a difference for people with diabetes? It could change their lives, James said earnestly. Imagine not having to draw blood multiple times a day. Imagine children with diabetes being able to monitor their levels without pain. Agent Lee was quiet for a moment, then stood up. Thank you for your time, Mr. Wilson. I'll be back shortly. After he left, James closed his eyes, fatigue washing over him in waves. How much longer would this go on? Would he be held overnight? The thought of spending the night in this room, or worse, being transferred to some detention facility, filled him with dread. Meanwhile, in Boston, Michael Wilson had managed to reach Dr. Robert Thompson at home. Dr. Thompson, I apologize for calling so late. This is Michael Wilson, James Wilson's son. Michael, yes, of course. Is everything all right? We've been trying to reach your father all day. That's why I'm calling. Dad's been detained by TSA at O'Hare. They're questioning him about the prototype he was bringing to Seattle. Detained? That's absurd. It's a medical device, for God's sake. They seem to think it looks suspicious. They've been holding him since this morning. Dr. Thompson's voice grew concerned. This is completely unacceptable. The device has been fully documented. We filed all the necessary paperwork for him to transport it. Well, something's gone wrong. They said they're checking with the university, but it's taking hours. Let me make some calls immediately. We have contacts at the Department of Homeland Security who know about our work. This should never have happened. In Seattle, Lisa arrived home to find her neighbor Diane sitting on the couch, the baby asleep in her arms. Any word from your dad? Diane asked quietly. Lisa shook her head, taking her sleeping daughter gently. He's being held by TSA in Chicago. It's some kind of security misunderstanding. James? A security threat? Diane looked incredulous. That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. He wouldn't hurt a fly. I know. It's about that medical device he was bringing for the conference. They think it looks suspicious. Lisa sighed deeply. Mike's making some calls. Hopefully this will all be resolved soon. Is there anything I can do? You've done more than enough watching the kids all day. Go home and get some rest. I'll call if I hear anything. After Diane left, Lisa gently placed the baby in her crib, then checked on her other two children who were fast asleep. In the quiet of her home, the full weight of the situation hit her. Her father, 78 years old with a heart condition and high blood pressure, was spending the night in some sterile detention room, treated like a criminal. The thought brought tears to her eyes. She made herself a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table, her phone in front of her, willing it to ring with good news. Instead, it was her laptop that chimed with an incoming email. She opened it to find a message from Dr. Thompson. Lisa, I've just spoken with Michael. This situation is completely unacceptable. I've contacted our university liaison with Homeland Security and explained the situation. They're reaching out to O'Hare TSA now. I've also sent documentation confirming your father's role in our project and the nature of the device. Please keep me updated and know that we're doing everything possible to resolve this quickly. Your father is a valued member of our team and a personal friend. Lisa felt a small measure of relief. At least things were happening, wheels were turning. She replied with a brief thank you, then tried her father's phone again, still straight to voicemail. In Chicago, the hours continued to crawl by. James had finally dozed off, his head resting uncomfortably against the wall when the door opened again. Agent Lee returned, accompanied by Agent Taylor and Director Richards. Mr. Wilson, Director Richards said, his tone notably different from earlier. We need to discuss some new information that's come to our attention. James straightened, instantly alert despite his fatigue. What information? Director Richards glanced at Agent Lee, who stepped forward with his tablet. Sir, we've received communication from Northwestern University and from the Department of Homeland Security's Science and Technology Directorate. They've confirmed the existence of the medical device project you described and your involvement with it. So you know I've been telling the truth all along, James said, unable to keep a hint of frustration from his voice. We're still verifying some details, Director Richards said. But yes, it appears your account of the device is accurate. Agent Lee turned his tablet toward James. Is this the conference you were planning to attend? On the screen was the website for the International Conference on Biomedical Engineering Innovations, showing the schedule for the next day. Listed among the afternoon presentations was non-invasive glucose monitoring using near-infrared spectroscopy, with the presenters including R. Thompson, Monsieur Hassan L. Chen, and J. Wilson. Yes, that's it, James confirmed. Our presentation is scheduled for 2 p.m. tomorrow. Agent Taylor spoke up. We've also received multiple calls regarding your detention, from Dr. Thompson at Northwestern, from someone at the Department of Homeland Security, and most recently, from the office of Congressman Lewis. James blinked in surprise. Michael must have contacted Lewis, who had been his student decades ago and was now serving his third term in Congress. There's one other thing, Agent Lee said, his expression softening slightly. In researching your background more thoroughly, we came across some information that wasn't initially in your file. He paused. You were awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 2010, James nodded. For my work in civil rights and education, yes. The three agents exchanged glances. Director Richards cleared his throat. Mr. Wilson, in light of this new information, we'll be expediting the final verification process. Agent Lee will stay with you while we make the necessary arrangements. After the others left, Agent Lee pulled up a chair. Can I get you anything, sir? Water, coffee? Some water would be nice, James replied. As the young agent went to fetch it, he felt a cautious hope rising. The nightmare might finally be ending. When Agent Lee returned with the water, he seemed less formal. Mr. Wilson, if you don't mind me asking, what was it like? The civil rights movement, I mean. James studied the young man's face, seeing genuine curiosity there. It was terrifying and inspiring in equal measure. We knew the risks, but we also knew the cause was just. He took a sip of water. My grandfather was born into slavery. My father faced Jim Crow laws his entire life. I marched so my children and grandchildren could have better. And now you're working on medical technology. The fight for justice takes many forms, James said with a small smile. Sometimes it's marching in the streets. Sometimes it's creating something that eases suffering. Agent Lee nodded thoughtfully. My mother has diabetes. Has had it for 15 years. Those finger pricks, they're small things, but they add up. That's why this device matters, James said. The small pains we can eliminate are still meaningful. Their conversation was interrupted when the door opened again. Director Richards entered, his demeanor noticeably different, almost respectful. Mr. Wilson, we owe you an apology. Mr. Wilson, we owe you an apology, Director Richards said, his tone markedly different from their previous interactions. There has been a serious misunderstanding, and you've been subjected to unnecessary detention and questioning as a result. James looked at the director steadily, taking in the shift in his demeanor. I appreciate the acknowledgement, but I'd like to understand exactly what happened here today. Director Richards nodded, pulling up a chair. That's fair. The initial flag was raised when the scanning system detected the components in your device. The configuration resembled certain prohibited items, triggering an automatic alert. That I can understand, James said. But once I explained what it was, showed you the documentation. You're right, Richards admitted. The situation should have been resolved much more quickly. Several factors complicated our assessment. He hesitated, one of which was a mix-up in our system. There's another James Wilson on a watch list, a man 30 years younger with ties to extremist groups. For a time there was confusion about whether you might be the same person. Despite the age difference, Changyur, as asked incredulously, Richards had the grace to look embarrassed. Our initial system flag didn't include age parameters. Once Agent Lee here conducted a more thorough background check, the error became obvious. Agent Lee, who had remained standing near the door, stepped forward. Sir, when I was reviewing your file, I noticed some discrepancies that didn't make sense. The activities and associations didn't match your age or background. That led me to dig deeper. And what did you find when you dug deeper? James asked. I found a distinguished career as a history professor, published books, civil rights activism, humanitarian work, and the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Agent Lee's voice held a note of respect. Not exactly the profile of a security threat. Yet I've been held here for... James checked his watch. Nearly 9 hours. A failure in our procedures, Richards acknowledged, and for that I sincerely apologize. We're processing your release now and making arrangements for you to reach Seattle as soon as possible. My flight left hours ago, James reminded him. We're aware. We've booked you on the next available flight departing at 11 p.m. It's a direct flight, first class. You'll arrive in Seattle around 1:30 a.m. local time. We've also arranged for your daughter to be notified, and for transportation to meet you at the airport. James felt a wave of relief tinged with lingering frustration. And my belongings? Being brought here now, including the prototype. We've verified its purpose with both Northwestern University and the Department of Homeland Security's Science and Technology Directorate. Richards paused. We also received calls from Congressman Lewis's office and from the president of Northwestern University. My son must have reached out to them, James said. Richards nodded. They were quite insistent about your immediate release. He checked his watch. The paperwork should be complete in about 15 minutes. Agent Lee will escort you to the VIP lounge, where you can rest and have a proper meal before your flight. As if on cue, another agent appeared at the door with James's carry-on bag and his other personal items. James checked that everything was there, including the prototype device now rewrapped in its protective casing. One more thing, Mr. Wilson, Director Richards said as he prepared to leave. If you wish to file a formal complaint about your treatment today, that is certainly your right. The contact information will be included in your release paperwork. After Richards left, Agent Lee helped James gather his belongings. Are you all right, sir? Can I get you anything else before we head to the lounge? James stretched his stiff limbs, wincing slightly. I think I just need to move around a bit. Sitting in that chair for hours hasn't done my old joints any favors. As they walked through the terminal, James was acutely aware of how different this escort was from the one earlier in the day, where before he had felt like a suspect being marched through a gauntlet of suspicious stares. Now he walked freely, his dignity restored. The VIP lounge was a stark contrast to the small detention room. Comfortable seating, soft lighting, a buffet of food, and large windows overlooking the runway where planes took off and landed in the night. Agent Lee guided him to a quiet corner. I'll leave you in peace, Mr. Wilson, but I'll be back to escort you to your gate when it's time. Please help yourself to anything you need. After the agent left, James sank into a plush armchair, his body finally relaxing after hours of tension. He took out his phone, which had been returned with his other belongings, and saw the numerous missed calls and texts from Lisa and Michael. He called Lisa first. Dad! Her voice was filled with relief. Are you okay? They told me they're putting you on a late flight. I'm fine, sweetheart. Tired and a bit sore, but fine. They've finally sorted out their mistake. It's outrageous what they put you through. Michael's furious. He's talking about filing a formal complaint, maybe even a lawsuit. James sighed. Let's discuss that when I get there. Right now, I just want to focus on making it to Seattle. Of course, I'll be waiting at the airport when you land, no matter how late it is. That's not necessary. They mentioned arranging transportation. I don't care what they arranged. I'm meeting my father at the airport, Lisa said firmly. James smiled, feeling a surge of love for his determined daughter. All right then, I'll see you tonight. Give the children a kiss from Grandpa. After ending the call, James helped himself to some food from the buffet, realizing how hungry he was after barely eating all day. As he ate, he called Michael to assure him he was all right and to thank him for reaching out to their contacts. It was the least I could do, Michael said. When Lisa called, I was ready to fly to Chicago myself. I appreciate that, son. Your calls definitely helped move things along. Dr. Thompson was livid when I told him what happened. He said the university is considering filing a formal protest. James took a sip of much-needed coffee. Let's see how things look in the light of day. Right now, I'm just grateful to be heading to Seattle finally. After ending the call, James sat quietly, watching the planes through the large windows. The events of the day replayed in his mind. The initial confusion at security, the growing suspicion, the hours of isolation and questioning. How had a routine trip gone so wrong? He couldn't help but wonder how much his race had factored into the situation. Would a 78-year-old white professor have triggered the same response? Would they have been so quick to suspect, so slow to verify? James had faced discrimination throughout his life, from the overt racism of his youth to the more subtle biases of his professional career. He had always tried to meet it with dignity and perseverance, to be, as his father had taught him, twice as good to get half as much. Today had been a stark reminder that despite all the progress, despite his accomplishments and standing, he could still be reduced to a threat profile, a suspicion, a man in a small room with no windows. His contemplation was interrupted when Agent Lee returned. "Mr. Wilson, they're preparing to board your flight. If you're ready, I can escort you to the gate." James gathered his belongings and followed the young agent through the now quieter terminal. At the gate, a small group of officials waited, including Director Richards. "Mr. Wilson, your boarding pass," Richards said, handing him the document. "Again, I want to express our deepest apologies for today's events." James accepted the boarding pass with a nod. "I appreciate that, Director. I hope something positive comes from this, perhaps a review of your procedures, especially when dealing with elderly travelers." "That process is already underway," Richards assured him. "Your experience has highlighted several areas where our protocols need improvement." As first-class passengers were called to board, Agent Lee stepped forward. "Sir, before you go, I just wanted to say it was an honor to meet you. Your work, both in civil rights and now in medical technology, is truly inspiring." James was touched by the young man's sincerity. "Thank you, Agent Lee. You played an important role today in setting things right." "I just did my job properly," Lee replied, "something that should have happened much sooner." As James made his way down the jetway, he felt the weight of the day's ordeal in his tired bones, yet there was also a strange sense of purpose renewed. The incident had reminded him why his work mattered, both his past efforts for civil rights and his current work on the medical device. The world still needed change, still needed people willing to stand up and make a difference. On the plane, settled into the comfortable first-class seat, James finally allowed himself to fully relax. The flight attendant brought him a blanket and pillow, treating him with the respect and care that had been so notably absent earlier in the day. As the plane took off into the night sky, James gazed out at the lights of Chicago falling away below. His thoughts turned to Seattle, to his family waiting there, to the conference where he would help present the device that had caused so much trouble. There was a certain irony in it all. A device designed to reduce pain had ended up causing him considerable distress. Yet as he drifted off to sleep, lulled by the hum of the engines, James Wilson felt a familiar determination settling in his heart. This incident would not be merely an ordeal to forget, but a story to tell, one that might, in its own small way, contribute to necessary change. Hours later, as the plane began its descent into Seattle, James woke to see the twinkling lights of the city spread out below. Despite everything, he felt a surge of excitement. He was finally arriving, finally about to see his family, finally able to hold his newest grandchild. The plane touched down smoothly, just after 1:30 a.m. As one of the first passengers to disembark, James walked through the quiet terminal, moving a bit stiffly after the long day but with his head held high. And there, waiting just beyond security, was Lisa, her face lighting up when she spotted him. "Dad!" She rushed forward, enveloping him in a tight hug. "Thank God you're here." James held his daughter close, feeling the tension of the day finally release. "I made it, sweetheart. A bit later than planned, but I made it." Lisa pulled back to look at him, her eyes scanning his face with concern. "Are you really okay? Did they treat you all right?" "I've had better days," James admitted with a small smile. "But I'm here now, and that's what matters." As they walked to the baggage claim, Lisa filled him in on the flurry of activity that had erupted once word of his detention had spread. The university president called the TSA director personally, and Dr. Thompson has been calling everyone he knows in Washington. Quite a commotion over one old professor, James said wryly. Not just any professor, Lisa corrected, squeezing his arm. My father. A man who deserves respect, not suspicion. At the baggage claim, a uniformed driver waited with a sign bearing James's name, part of the TSA's attempt at making amends. Lisa had driven herself, but they accepted the car service for James's luggage, which the driver insisted on handling. In Lisa's car, heading toward her home in the quiet early morning hours, James finally felt the full weight of the ordeal lifting. He was safe, he was with family, and tomorrow, or rather, later today, he would help present the device that had inadvertently caused so much trouble. Dr. Thompson called again just before I left for the airport, Lisa said as she drove. He wants you to know they've pushed the presentation back to 4 p.m. to give you time to rest. James nodded gratefully. That's thoughtful of him. I could certainly use a few hours of sleep in a real bed. The kids can't wait to see you, Lisa continued. Even though I told them you'd be arriving in the middle of the night, they wanted to stay up. I finally got them to bed around 10, promising that Grandpa would be there when they woke up. James smiled, picturing his grandchildren's excited faces. I've missed them, and I can't wait to meet the new little one. She's perfect, Dad. She has your eyes, you know, that same thoughtful look. As they drove through the sleeping city, James gazed out at the unfamiliar streets that would be his home for the next 2 weeks. Despite the ordeal he'd just endured, he felt a profound gratitude for his family, for the work he was doing, for the life he had built. Tomorrow, he would stand in front of an audience of medical professionals and help present a device that could make life better for millions of people with diabetes. The same device that had been viewed with such suspicion would be recognized for what it truly was: a tool for healing, for reducing pain, for improving lives. There was a lesson in that, James thought. A reminder that perspective matters, that quick judgments can lead to grave mistakes, that looking beyond the surface can reveal truth and purpose. We're home, Lisa said softly as they pulled into the driveway of a charming 2-story house. Home. Not his own home back in Chicago, but a place where he was loved, where he belonged, where his presence mattered. After a day of being treated as a threat, as someone inherently suspicious, the contrast couldn't have been more profound. As James stepped out of the car into the cool Seattle night, he looked up at the stars visible between the clouds. Today had been a stark reminder of how far society still had to go, of the biases that still shaped interactions and assumptions. But it had also shown him the power of truth to eventually prevail, of the importance of those who take the time to look deeper, to question initial judgments, to see the person behind the profile. Come on, Dad, Lisa said, taking his arm. Let's get you inside. Together they walked toward the warm light of the house, leaving behind the shadows of a day that had tested James Wilson's patience, dignity, and faith in humanity, a test he had met with the same quiet strength that had carried him through all the challenges of his remarkable life. The morning sun filtered through the guest room curtains, gently waking James from a deep, much-needed sleep. For a moment he was disoriented, his mind still foggy with dreams. Then he remembered. He was in Seattle at Lisa's house. He had finally arrived, many hours later than planned. Glancing at the bedside clock, he saw it was almost 9. He'd managed a solid 6 hours of sleep, not enough to fully recover from yesterday's ordeal, but sufficient to face the new day. His body felt stiff, a reminder of those long hours in the uncomfortable detention room chair. As he slowly sat up, there was a soft knock at the door. Grandpa, are you awake? A child's voice filled with barely contained excitement. James smiled. I'm awake. Come on in. The door burst open and 2 pajama-clad children tumbled in. 7-year-old Ben and 5-year-old Olivia, their faces bright with joy. Grandpa! They cried in unison, rushing to the bed. James opened his arms wide and they fell into his embrace. Oh my goodness, look how big you've both gotten, James exclaimed, hugging them close. Ben, you must have grown 3 inches since Christmas. And Olivia, your hair is so long now. Mom said you had trouble at the airport, Ben said, his expression suddenly serious. Were the bad guys trying to get you? James chuckled gently. No, nothing like that. Just a misunderstanding. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, even people whose job it is to keep us safe. Did they put you in jail? Olivia asked, her eyes wide. No, sweetheart. They just asked me a lot of questions. I had to be very patient. I'm not good at being patient, Olivia confessed. It takes practice, James assured her. Like anything worth doing. Lisa appeared in the doorway holding a baby wrapped in a soft yellow blanket. I see the welcoming committee found you, she said with a smile. I told them to let you sleep, but they've been checking every 15 minutes since 7. The best wake-up call I could ask for, James said warmly. Who wants to help make Grandpa some breakfast? Lisa asked. Me. Both children raised their hands enthusiastically. Excellent. Go wash up and get dressed. I'll be down in a minute. As the children scampered off, Lisa entered the room and sat on the edge of the bed. How are you feeling, Dad? Really? James considered the question. Physically? A bit stiff and tired, otherwise, he paused. It's strange. I feel both angry about what happened and oddly purposeful, like it happened for a reason. Lisa nodded. I understand that. But you have every right to be just plain angry, too. What they did was wrong. Yes, it was, James agreed. But dwelling on it won't change what happened. He looked at the tiny bundle in Lisa's arms. Now I believe I have a new grandchild to meet. Lisa's face softened as she gently placed the baby in his arms. Meet your granddaughter, Evelyn. We named her after Mom. James felt a swell of emotion as he looked down at the tiny face. She had Lisa's nose and chin, but the eyes, when they fluttered open briefly, did indeed have a familiar thoughtfulness to them. Hello, little Evelyn, he whispered. I'm your grandpa. I've been very excited to meet you. The baby yawned, her tiny fist escaping the blanket to wave in the air. James carefully caught it with his finger, marveling at how small yet perfect her hand was. She's beautiful, Lisa. Absolutely beautiful. She is, isn't she? Lisa smiled proudly. The kids adore her. Ben reads to her every night, and Olivia insists on picking out her outfits. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, 3 generations connected in the quiet morning light. Then James reluctantly handed the baby back. I should get ready. What time is Dr. Thompson expecting me at the conference? He said not to worry about arriving until around 3. The presentation isn't until 4, and he wanted you to have time to rest. Lisa stood, adjusting the baby in her arms. There's fresh towels in the bathroom, and I put your suitcase in the closet. Take your time coming down. After Lisa left, James moved slowly to the bathroom, feeling every one of his 78 years this morning. A hot shower helped ease some of the stiffness, and by the time he dressed and made his way downstairs, he felt more like himself. The kitchen was a scene of cheerful activity. Ben was carefully setting the table, his tongue between his teeth in concentration as he placed each fork just so. Olivia was standing on a step stool beside Lisa, helping to stir pancake batter. Baby Evelyn dozed in a bassinet near the table, undisturbed by the gentle commotion around her. There he is, Lisa smiled. Coffee's ready, Dad. Black with 1 sugar, right? Perfect, James said, accepting the mug gratefully. Breakfast was a lively affair, with the children eager to tell their grandfather about everything he'd missed since their last visit. Ben's soccer team, Olivia's dance recital, their new puppy who was currently at the groomer's. And I lost a tooth, Olivia announced, displaying the gap in her smile. The tooth fairy brought her $2, Ben added, a hint of jealousy in his voice. I only got $1 for my last tooth. Inflation, James said solemnly, making Lisa laugh. After breakfast, Lisa shooed the children upstairs to finish getting dressed for the day. Michael called while you were in the shower, she told James as they cleaned up. He's booked a flight for next weekend to come see you. He doesn't need to do that, James protested. I'm fine. It's not just about yesterday, Dad. He misses you. We all do. Lisa loaded plates into the dishwasher. Plus, I think he wants to hear about the conference directly from you. You know how interested he is in your work with the medical team. James nodded, remembering how Michael had always been fascinated by science and technology, even as a child. Now a software engineer in Boston, he still retained that curiosity about all fields of knowledge. Oh, and Dr. Thompson called too. He said there's going to be some media at the presentation today. James looked up in surprise. Media? Why? Apparently word got out about what happened at O'Hare. There's interest in both the device and the incident. Lisa hesitated. Several civil rights organizations have already reached out wanting statements. James sighed. I didn't want this to become a spectacle. The focus should be on the device, on what it can do for people with diabetes. I know, Dad, but maybe this attention can serve both purposes. Highlight the techno, logi, and address what happened to you, Make something positive come from it. Before James could respond, his phone rang. It was Dr. Thompson. James, thank God you made it to Seattle. I can't begin to express how upset we all are about what happened. I appreciate your concern, Robert, and your help in resolving the situation. Lisa tells me you've been fielding calls from the media. Yes, the story has gained some traction. A respected professor, Presidential Medal of Freedom recipient, detained as a security threat while transporting a medical device he helped create. It's generating interest. Thompson paused. How would you feel about addressing it briefly during the presentation? Just a few minutes to acknowledge what happened and then pivot to the device itself. James considered this. I don't want to hijack the presentation with my personal experience, but if you think it would be appropriate, I do. In fact, I think it creates a powerful narrative. How a device meant to reduce suffering was misinterpreted as something harmful. There's a metaphor there about perception and reality that resonates beyond just our project. After ending the call, James sat quietly, thinking about Thompson's words. There was indeed a larger story here, one that connected his past civil rights work with his current scientific endeavors in ways he hadn't fully appreciated before. The morning passed quickly with family activities. James helped Ben with a science project about simple circuits, read stories with Olivia, and spent time just holding baby Evelyn, memorizing the details of her tiny face. Lisa's husband, Tom, who had been away at a conference himself, returned home mid-morning and was relieved to see James safe and well. By early afternoon, it was time to prepare for the conference. As James changed into his presentation clothes, a neat gray suit with a blue tie, he reflected on the journey that had brought him here. Not just the troubled flight from Chicago, but the longer path. From a boy who had faced segregated schools and whites-only signs, to a professor who had taught generations of students, to a retiree contributing to medical innovation. His phone buzzed with a text from Michael. Proud of you, Dad. Always have been. Call me after the presentation. Love you. James smiled, warmed by his son's words. He finished dressing and headed downstairs where Tom was waiting to drive him to the conference center. Good luck, Dad, Lisa said, hugging him goodbye. Remember, we'll be in the audience cheering you on. The Seattle Convention Center was bustling with activity when they arrived. The International Conference on Biomedical Engineering Innovations had drawn participants from around the world, with session rooms filled to capacity and exhibitors demonstrating the latest medical technologies in the main hall. Dr. Thompson met James at the registration desk, relief evident on his face. There you are! We were just going through the final preparations. He handed James a conference badge and program. How are you holding up? I'm fine, Robert. Ready to focus on what matters, the device and what it can do for patients. Thompson nodded approvingly. That's the spirit. Come on, let me introduce you to some people before we get started. In a small meeting room adjacent to the main presentation hall, the rest of the team had gathered. Dr. Hassan, who had flown in from Toronto, embraced James warmly. My friend, when I couldn't reach you yesterday, I feared something had gone wrong. But I never imagined this. His normally cheerful face was creased with concern. Are you truly all right? I'm better now, James assured him, and eager to move forward with our presentation. Dr. Chen and the graduate students who had contributed to the project were equally welcoming and concerned. As they went through the presentation one last time, checking slides and discussing key points, James felt a renewed appreciation for this collaborative effort. These were people from different backgrounds, different countries, different generations, united by the shared goal of reducing human suffering. As the time for the presentation approached, James noticed the hall filling beyond capacity. Extra chairs were being brought in and people stood along the walls. Dr. Thompson had not exaggerated. The incident at O'Hare had generated significant interest in their work. James spotted Lisa, Tom, and the children in the third row. Olivia waved excitedly when she saw him, and he gave her a small wave in return. Seeing his family there helped steady his nerves. At precisely 4 o'clock, Dr. Thompson stepped to the podium and welcomed the audience. After briefly introducing the project and the team members, he addressed the elephant in the room. Many of you may have heard about an incident involving our colleague, Dr. James Wilson, at Chicago O'Hare Airport yesterday. Dr. Wilson was detained for 9 hours by TSA agents who mistook our glucose monitoring prototype for a suspicious device. Before we present our research, I've asked Dr. Wilson if he would share a few words about this experience and how it connects to our work. As James approached the podium, the room fell silent. He looked out at the sea of faces, medical professionals, engineers, students, journalists, and his own family, and felt the weight of the moment. Thank you, Robert. And thank you all for being here today. James adjusted the microphone slightly. Yesterday, I experienced something that was both troubling and illuminating. A device designed to reduce pain and improve lives was viewed with suspicion and fear. I, by association, became suspect as well. He paused, gathering his thoughts. Throughout my life, I've witnessed the power of perception, how the same reality can be viewed in radically different ways depending on one's perspective. As a young man during the civil rights movement, I saw how people fighting for basic human dignity could be perceived as threats to the established order. As a professor, I taught my students to look beyond surface appearances, to seek the deeper truths that history reveals. The room remained silent, attentive. Yesterday's experience reminded me that this work, the work of challenging perceptions, of looking deeper, is never finished. The device we're presenting today operates on a similar principle. It looks beneath the surface using light to reveal what is invisible to the naked eye. The glucose levels in a person's blood. James gestured to the prototype, which sat on a display table nearby. When TSA agents looked at this device, they saw a potential weapon. What they missed was its true purpose: to heal, to help, to reduce suffering. It's a reminder that what we see is often shaped by what we expect to see, by our preconceptions and fears. He looked directly at the audience now, his voice strong and clear. But here's the hopeful part of this story. Perception can change. Those same TSA agents, once they took the time to investigate thoroughly, to look beyond their initial assumptions, came to see both the device and me differently. That capacity for change, for growth and understanding, gives me hope. James smiled slightly. So yes, I spent 9 hours in detention yesterday because of a misperception. But today I stand before you not as a victim of that experience, but as someone who sees in it a reaffirmation of why our work matters. Not just the technical work of creating this device, but the deeper human work of challenging assumptions, looking beneath surfaces, and seeking truth. He stepped back from the podium. Now, let's talk about what this little device can actually do. The presentation that followed was met with rapt attention. Dr. Thompson explained the technical aspects of the system. Dr. Hassan covered the spectroscopic analysis methodology, and Dr. Chen demonstrated the software interface. When it was James's turn to explain the electrical components he had helped design, he spoke with clear enthusiasm, showing how his engineering background had found purpose in this medical application. The question and answer session afterward was lively, with many technical inquiries about the device's accuracy, power consumption, and production timeline. But there were also questions about the airport incident, which James addressed briefly but firmly, always steering the conversation back to the technology itself. As the session concluded, Dr. Thompson made a final announcement. We're pleased to share that this morning, our team received confirmation of a major grant to move this prototype into clinical trials. If all goes well, we expect to have a market-ready device within 2 years. The applause was enthusiastic, and as people began to file out, many approached James personally, some to discuss the technology, others to express support regarding his detention experience. Several journalists requested interviews, which James politely deferred until after he'd had time with his family. Lisa made her way to him through the crowd, children in tow. "Dad, that was wonderful," she said, hugging him tightly. "The way you connected what happened to the larger purpose, it was perfect. Grandpa, you were the best one up there," Olivia declared loyally. Ben, more interested in the technical aspects, asked, "Can I see the device up close? How does it actually work?" James led his grandson to the display table, where he carefully explained the components in terms the 7-year-old could understand. Ben listened intently, his eyes wide with fascination. "So it can see through your skin? Like Superman's X-ray vision?" James chuckled. "Something like that. It uses light we can't see with our eyes, and that light bounces back differently depending on how much sugar is in your blood." "That's so cool." Ben breathed, looking at the device with newfound respect. As the hall gradually emptied, Dr. Thompson approached with a woman James didn't recognize. "James, there's someone who'd like to me." "At you. This is Angela Rivera, Deputy Director of TSA Operations for the Western Region." James shook her hand, noting her formal demeanor. "Dr. Wilson, I wanted to personally extend our organization's apologies for what happened in Chicago," she said. "I've been briefed on the situation, and I want you to know we're taking it very seriously. We've already begun a review of our procedures, particularly regarding elderly travelers and those transporting medical or scientific equipment." "I appreciate that," James replied. "My hope is that something positive comes from this experience." "That's actually why I'm here," Angela continued. "We'd like to invite you to participate in a consultation about improving our screening protocols. Your perspective, both as someone who experienced a significant failure in our system and as someone with expertise in technical devices, would be invaluable." James was surprised by the offer. "I'd be interested in that. What exactly would it involve?" "Initially, a series of meetings with our policy team, potentially helping to develop training materials for our agents." She handed him her card. "Please think about it and let me know. We're sincere about making improvements." After she left, Lisa raised an eyebrow. "From detained as a security threat to consulting on their policies? That's quite a turnaround." "Sometimes the best insights come from the most unexpected sources," James said thoughtfully, pocketing the card. The next 2 weeks in Seattle passed quickly, filled with family time and several follow-up meetings related to the glucose monitoring project. James visited his grandchildren's schools to speak about his work, gave interviews to local media about both the device and his experience at O'Hare, and enjoyed quiet evenings with Lisa's family. Michael flew in for the weekend as planned, and the 3 generations of Wilson men spent a day fishing on Puget Sound, talking about everything from technology to family history to the future. James shared more details about his detention experience, and Michael listened with a mix of outrage and pride in how his father had handled it. "You know, Dad," Michael said as they watched Ben attempt to bait his hook, "what happened to you has started something. There's been coverage in national papers, discussions on morning shows. People are talking about profiling, about how we treat elderly travelers, about the human cost of security theater." James nodded. "I've seen some of it. It's a complex issue. We need security, but we also need humanity and common sense in how it's applied. Are you going to take that TSA consulting offer?" James had been pondering this question since meeting Angela Rivera. "I'm leaning toward yes. If I can help prevent someone else from going through what I did, it would be worthwhile." Michael smiled. "That's so you, Dad. Always finding a way to make something constructive out of adversity." On his last evening in Seattle, James sat on Lisa's porch swing, baby Evelyn sleeping peacefully in his arms. The sun was setting over the distant mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. It was a moment of perfect tranquility, so different from the tension and uncertainty he'd experienced in that small detention room. Lisa joined him, handing him a mug of tea. "Penny for your thoughts?" James smiled. "I was just thinking about journeys. The one that brought me here was more complicated than I expected, but the destination was worth it." "You always find the silver lining, don't you?" "Not always," James admitted, "but I try. It's how I've made it through 78 years in this world." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sky darken and the first stars appear. "I got another call today," James said eventually, "from Congressman Lewis. He's organizing a congressional hearing on airport security procedures, particularly how they impact elderly travelers and people of color. He's asked me to testify." Lisa looked at him. "Will you do it?" James nodded slowly. "I think I should. Not to complain about what happened to me, but to advocate for a more balanced approach. Security with dignity, protection without profiling. That sounds like something worth fighting for," Lisa agreed. "It is," James said softly, looking down at his sleeping granddaughter. "It always has been." 3 months later, James sat at a different table in a different city, facing a different audience. The congressional hearing room was packed with legislators, media, and members of the public. He had just finished delivering his testimony, describing both his detention experience and his recommendations for security reform. "Dr. Wilson," said the committee chairwoman, Your suggestion for a specialized screening protocol for travelers with medical devices is intriguing. Could you elaborate on how that might work in practice? James leaned toward the microphone. Certainly. What I'm proposing is a pre-verification system for travelers with legitimate medical devices or prototypes. This would allow universities, research institutions, and medical companies to register their devices in a secure database, providing technical specifications and verification codes that TSA agents could reference during screening. And you believe this would have prevented your detention? I believe it would have significantly reduced the likelihood, yes. The key is providing agents with better information and better tools for verification, so they don't have to rely solely on their judgment in the moment. The questioning continued for nearly an hour, with James responding thoughtfully to each inquiry. When the session finally concluded, several committee members approached to thank him for his insights. Outside the hearing room, James met with Dr. Thompson and the rest of the medical team, who had come to Washington to support him and to promote their now famous glucose monitoring device. You were brilliant in there, James, Dr. Thompson said warmly. Clear, constructive, never accusatory, but still honest about what went wrong. I had a good teacher, James replied with a smile. My father always said, don't just point out problems, offer solutions. Dr. Hassan clapped him on the shoulder. And speaking of solutions, wait until you see the latest test results on our device. The accuracy rates are exceeding our projections. As the group walked toward the exit, a young TSA agent approached hesitantly. James recognized him immediately. Agent Lee, he said with genuine pleasure. What brings you to Washington? David Lee smiled nervously. I've been assigned to a task force implementing some of the reforms you've been advocating for. When I heard you were testifying today, I wanted to come listen. He paused. What you said in there about security with dignity, that really resonated with me. It's why I joined TSA in the first place. I'm glad to hear that, James said, and I'm pleased you're part of the reform effort. Fresh perspectives are essential for real change. As they parted ways, James felt a sense of completion. His ordeal at O'Hare, frightening and unjust as it had been, had set in motion a chain of events that might lead to meaningful improvements in a flawed system. Later that evening, at a small celebration dinner with the research team, James received a call from Lisa. How did it go, Dad? She asked eagerly. Better than I expected. I think they were actually listening, not just going through the motions. That's wonderful. The kids are so proud of their activist grandpa. Olivia told her entire class that you were changing the government to make it better. James laughed. Well, that might be overstating things a bit. I don't think so, Lisa said seriously. You've always taught us that change happens when good people speak up, when they refuse to accept injustice as inevitable. After the call, as James rejoined his colleagues at the table, he reflected on Lisa's words. Throughout his life as a young man marching for civil rights, as a professor inspiring students to think critically about history, as a retiree helping to create medical technology, and now as an advocate for security reform, he had tried to live by that principle. The journey hadn't always been easy. There had been setbacks and obstacles, moments of doubt and discouragement. But there had also been progress, often in unexpected ways and through unlikely channels. As he raised a glass with his friends, celebrating both their scientific achievement and the potential for positive change in airport security practices, James Wilson felt a deep sense of gratitude. At 78, he was still contributing, still making a difference in ways he couldn't have anticipated. The frightening hours in that small room at O'Hare had reminded him of a fundamental truth, that even in moments of injustice and misunderstanding, there remained the possibility of growth, of learning, of transformation, both for individuals and for society as a whole. It was, he reflected, a truth worth remembering, and a story worth telling.